For 30 years, they were the perfect couple. A man and a woman, bound by vows, by love, by time. Neighbors envied their devotion, friends admired their bond. Together, they built a life that, to the outside world, seemed ordinary in the best way possible. Morning coffees brewed just the way they liked it. Shared glances across a crowded room, knowing smiles that spoke of familiarity and comfort. Weekend routines that never wavered, grocery shopping on Saturdays, movie nights on Sundays, long car rides with the windows down, listening to the same old songs. A love story, not made for headlines, but one that was steady, unshakable. Her laugh filled their home. His voice called her name in the dark. Their children, their friends, their neighbors, everyone who knew them saw a couple who had withstood the test of time. Weddings come and go, relationships rise and fall, but this was something different. This was meant to last. This was forever. But time is a funny thing. It has a way of hiding truths, tucking away the things we don't see, the things we don't question. It has a way of making the familiar feel safe. And sometimes, it has a way of keeping secrets, pressing them so deep into the cracks of everyday life that they almost disappear. Almost. And then, one day, he found out. A single moment, a single discovery, unraveling everything. A truth so unthinkable, so impossible to comprehend, that in an instant, the weight of 30 years came crashing down. Love. Trust. Devotion. All of it, gone. Replaced by confusion, by betrayal, by a rage so consuming that there was no turning back. The news spread quickly. A quiet home turned into a crime scene. Police sirens split the night. A man, once a husband, now in handcuffs. A woman, once a wife, now lying still, a life cut short by the very person who had sworn to protect her. The world would ask the same question over and over again: how could this happen? How could a secret remain buried for so long? And what could drive a man to take the life of the person he had loved for decades? Tonight, we retrace the steps of a marriage built on love, on trust, on a carefully constructed illusion. We examine the years before the breaking point, the signs no one saw, the moment of revelation that turned a lifetime into a lie. And finally, we try to understand what was going through his mind when he pulled the trigger. Because some stories end in heartbreak. Others end in blood. 30 years. A lifetime to some. A fleeting moment to others. 30 years of whispered conversations before sleep, of hands reaching for each other across the dinner table, of glances exchanged in the quiet comfort of familiarity. A man and a woman, bound not just by law, but by the invisible threads that tie two lives together over decades of shared experiences. To the outside world, they were steady. Unshakable. The kind of couple people spoke about with admiration. They've been together forever, the neighbors would say. They must be doing something right. They had their routines, morning coffee as the sun crept through the curtains, the same restaurant for every anniversary, the same side of the bed claimed year after year. They knew each other in the way only people who have spent half their lives together can. Their wedding photos sat in dusty frames on the mantel. Images frozen in time, her in white, him in black, both smiling, unaware of the decades ahead of them. Family vacations captured in fading Polaroids, the edges curling from age. Christmas mornings where wrapping paper littered the floor, birthdays marked by candles blown out in a single breath. A house filled with small memories, each one stitched into the fabric of their existence. They weren't perfect, but they were solid. Or so it seemed. Behind closed doors, beyond the carefully curated image of a long and happy marriage, something else was there. Something unnoticed, something unspoken. Secrets have a way of hiding in plain sight, slipping between the cracks of everyday life. And this one had remained buried for decades. Until one day, it wasn't. One revelation. One moment where everything he thought he knew collapsed beneath him. A single truth so shocking, so incomprehensible, that it turned love into confusion. Confusion into anger. And anger into something far worse. The call came late in the evening. The kind of call that shatters the silence, that turns a normal night into something unrecognizable. Police arrived to find a man standing over the body of his wife, his hands shaking, his breathing uneven. The gun lay at his feet. The home they had shared for 30 years, a home once filled with warmth and love, now cold, empty. A single shot echoing in the stillness. As the world tried to make sense of it, the same questions were asked again and again. How could this happen? How could a secret remain buried for so long? And what could drive a man to do the unthinkable, to take the life of the person he had built his world around? Tonight, we go back to the beginning. To the first meeting, the vows exchanged, the years that followed. To the moments before the breaking point. Before the truth unraveled everything. This is the story of a marriage built on love, on trust, on the things people don't say out loud. But it's also a story about what happens when those things are forced into the light. When the life someone thought they knew is revealed to be something else entirely. And when, in a single moment, everything changes. 30 years. That's how long they spent together. 3 decades of marriage. 3 decades of trust, of shared memories, of quiet mornings and long conversations that stretched into the night. It was the kind of life people long for, a steady partnership, a bond that seemed unbreakable. From the outside, they were the perfect couple. A man and a woman, living in the same house for years, building a life brick by brick. Friends described them as inseparable. Neighbors saw them as a fixture of the community. A couple that had lasted when so many others had fallen apart. They finished each other's sentences, knew each other's routines by heart. She knew how he liked his coffee. He knew which songs made her cry. They had their disagreements like any couple, but they always found their way back to each other. That's what love was, wasn't it? An understanding that no matter what happened, they would always choose each other. That's what he thought, anyway. But love is a strange thing. It can feel endless. Unshakable. Until, one day, it isn't. It started with a feeling. Something small. Something easy to ignore. A look that lingered a little too long. A hesitation before answering a question. A deflection, subtle but noticeable, when the past came up in conversation. Little things, unimportant on their own. But together, they formed a pattern. He dismissed it. He had to. Because the alternative was unthinkable. And for 30 years, there had been no reason to question her. No reason to suspect that anything about their life together was anything other than what it seemed. But the mind is relentless. Once a thought is planted, it grows. And no matter how much he tried to push it away, that feeling, that creeping, nagging feeling, wouldn't leave. Then, there were the nights she stayed up long after he had gone to bed. The hushed phone calls he wasn't meant to overhear. The letters that arrived with no return address. He told himself it was nothing. He had to believe that. Because if he didn't, then he would have to admit that something was wrong. And how could something be wrong after 30 years? But the truth does not care about time. It does not care about love, about vows, about the memories built over a lifetime. The truth waits. And when it reveals itself, it does so without mercy. The moment came suddenly. A discovery that couldn't be ignored. A single piece of paper, tucked away where no one was supposed to find it. A document that unraveled everything. 30 years. 30 years of marriage, of trust, of devotion, shattered in an instant. He stared at it. His hands shook. His mind refused to understand what his eyes were seeing. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be. The woman he had shared his life with. The woman he had built a future with. The woman he had loved with everything he had. She wasn't who she said she was. The revelation was like stepping off solid ground and realizing there was nothing beneath him. Everything tilted. Everything changed. He felt sick. His breath came fast and shallow. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might stop altogether. How long had she known? How long had she kept this from him? And then came the bigger question, the one that clawed at his mind, the one that refused to let go. Had she ever really loved him at all? The room felt smaller. The walls closed in. He could hear his pulse in his ears, a steady, deafening drumbeat. 30 years. Was it all a lie? The truth was out. There was no turning back. And in that moment, something inside him shifted. He was no longer the man he had been just minutes before. The next few moments would decide everything. The paper trembled in his hands. The room that had been his home for 30 years now felt unfamiliar. The walls, the furniture, the framed photographs, they were the same, but different. Like he was seeing them for the first time, or maybe, for what they really were. His mind raced. His breath came shallow. His body felt hot, then cold, then nothing at all. He tried to swallow, but his throat was dry. The air felt thick. Heavy. Unbearable. And then, he heard it. Footsteps. Soft. Unhurried. Moving toward him from the hallway. He looked up just as she entered the room. The woman he had loved. The woman he had trusted. The woman who, only moments ago, had been the most familiar person in the world. Except now, she was a stranger. She saw the paper in his hand. And in that instant, she knew. Where did you find that? Her voice was calm. Too calm. He couldn't answer. He couldn't form words. His thoughts were too tangled, too chaotic. Instead, he just stared at her, searching her face for something, remorse, explanation, anything that made sense. You weren't supposed to see that, she said softly. And there it was. Confirmation. A quiet admission of guilt. No denial. No frantic excuses. Just the truth, sitting there between them, waiting to swallow him whole. How long? His voice cracked when he spoke. He barely recognized it. She hesitated. And that hesitation told him everything. The whole time, she finally said. Since the beginning. The words hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back a step, his chest tightening, his vision blurring at the edges. His ears rang. The weight of her confession crushed him. 30 years. Every moment. Every conversation. Every touch. A lie. You were never going to tell me, he whispered. She didn't answer. And that silence, more than anything, broke something inside of him. His body moved before his mind could catch up. The chair scraped against the floor as he stood abruptly. His hands clenched at his sides. His breath came sharp, uneven. I loved you, he choked out. I know. Her voice was steady. He waited for her to say more. To explain. To make it better. But she didn't. Because there was nothing to say. Nothing that could fix this. Nothing that could erase the fact that the life he thought he had was gone. The betrayal seeped into his bones, turning confusion into rage. A slow, creeping heat that rose in his chest, in his throat, in his head until it was all he could feel. Say something, he shouted. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She just stood there, watching him, waiting. And that made it worse. The walls of the room felt like they were closing in. His hands balled into fists. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. And then, he saw it. The gun. It had been there for years. Locked away. Forgotten. A relic of the past. Until now. His fingers wrapped around it without thinking. The metal was cold against his palm. A strange contrast to the burning in his chest. Put it down. Her voice was quiet, measured. He couldn't. 30 years. 30 years of love, of trust, of memories. Gone in a single breath. His hand trembled. His mind screamed at him to stop. To think. To breathe. But it was too late. The gunshot shattered the silence. And in an instant, everything was over. The gunshot rang out, cutting through the quiet of the house. Then, silence. Heavy. Unforgiving. A silence that stretched longer than it should have, the kind that only follows something irreversible. The man, her husband, stood frozen, the gun still in his trembling hands. His breath came in short, ragged bursts, as if his body had not yet caught up to what had just happened. His mind reeled, playing the moment back, over and over, but it changed nothing. She was on the floor. Still. Motionless. Blood spreading outward in a slow, creeping pool. And then, a sound. Not from her. From him. A choked, broken gasp as the reality crashed over him. The rage that had burned in his chest only moments before was gone, replaced by something colder. He staggered backward, his knees nearly giving out beneath him. And then, he did the only thing he could do. He picked up the phone, and called 911. I shot my wife. I shot her. Oh my God. Oh my God, what did I do? Law enforcement's response, the arrest. The call was logged at exactly 9:42 p.m. Within minutes, the quiet neighborhood was flooded with flashing red and blue lights, the wail of sirens cutting through the night. Officers arrived to find him still in the house, still gripping the phone in one hand, the gun now discarded at his feet. He did not resist. There was no fight. No attempt to flee. When the officers entered, he simply raised his hands, his face pale, his eyes distant, unfocused. His voice barely above a whisper. She's in there. That was all he said. Two officers moved past him, stepping cautiously into the room where his wife lay. One bent down to check for a pulse, even though they already knew what they would find. The other took a slow, sweeping glance around the space, framed photos on the walls, a dinner plate still sitting in the sink, the remnants of an ordinary life that had, in one instant, become a crime scene. Back in the living room, the husband was placed in handcuffs. His wrists felt like they belonged to someone else. His body moved as they led him out, but his mind was elsewhere. He barely registered the cameras flashing in the dark, the murmurs of neighbors gathered in small clusters along the sidewalk. He couldn't hear them. He couldn't hear anything. A shocking crime has rocked this quiet suburban neighborhood tonight. Police have confirmed that a husband has been taken into custody following the fatal shooting of his wife. Sources say the couple had been married for over 30 years, but something led to a violent confrontation that no one saw coming. Gathering evidence, what the house revealed. Inside, investigators worked through the night. Every inch of the home was documented. Photographs taken. Measurements recorded. Evidence bagged and catalogued. The gun was retrieved first, a legally owned firearm, kept in the house for years, and used until now. But it wasn't the only thing they found. On the dining table, the document that had started it all lay open, its contents now central to an investigation that would stretch far beyond just a simple act of violence. Old letters were uncovered, hidden in the back of a drawer. Photographs that didn't quite align with the version of the past the husband had believed in. Small things, pieces of a puzzle that, when put together, painted a picture far different from the one he had known. The crime was simple. The motive, however, was not. Community and media reaction, a town caught in the middle. As the news spread, so did the questions. The neighbors who had waved to the couple from across the street, who had exchanged pleasantries at the grocery store, now spoke in hushed tones. "I just can't believe it," one woman told reporters. "They were so normal. They were happy." But then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "Or at least, I thought they were." Others were less forgiving. 30 years, a man scoffed, shaking his head. "You're telling me he didn't know? That doesn't make sense. And even if he didn't, how do you go from that to murder?" The case became a wildfire, spreading beyond the town, beyond the state. News networks latched onto it. Opinion pieces flooded the internet. Everyone had a theory, a stance, a verdict long before the courts ever had their say. And in the center of it all sat a single, unanswerable question. What makes a person snap? The trial began 6 months after the night that shattered everything. By then, the case had already become a national spectacle. Legal analysts dissected every detail. Talk show hosts debated morality, deception, and accountability. Social media boiled over with opinions, some condemning the husband as a cold-blooded murderer, others sympathizing with a man who had, in their eyes, been betrayed in the most profound way. But in the courtroom, there was only one thing that mattered: the law. The charges, a case of murder or manslaughter. The prosecution was firm in their stance. The state charged him with second-degree murder, arguing that, while the killing had not been premeditated, it had been intentional. The moment he pulled the trigger, they claimed, was a moment of choice. And in that choice, a life was taken. The defense, however, sought a lesser charge, manslaughter. They argued that he had acted in the heat of passion, that his mind had not been clear, that the revelation of his wife's past had shattered his reality so completely that his actions could not be judged the same as a calculated murder. And so, the battle began. Key testimonies, piecing together the truth. Witnesses for the prosecution. The first to take the stand were the officers who had arrived at the scene. Their testimonies were clinical, factual. "He was holding the phone when we entered. He looked lost. But when we asked him what happened, his words were clear. I shot her." There was no ambiguity. The medical examiner followed, confirming that the victim had died almost instantly. One shot. Center mass. A wound that left no chance of survival. Then came the character witnesses. Friends, neighbors, former colleagues. All describing a couple that had, at least outwardly, seemed ordinary, stable, even loving. "I never saw them fight," one longtime friend testified. "Not once. I thought they were one of the lucky ones, 30 years together. That's rare these days." The prosecution pressed on this point, painting a picture of a man who had lived a normal life right up until the moment he made a decision he could never take back. This was not self-defense, the lead prosecutor argued. This was not an accident. This was a man who, in a moment of rage, chose to end the life of the woman he had vowed to love. Witnesses for the defense. But the defense had their own story to tell. A psychiatrist took the stand, explaining the psychological impact of sudden, traumatic revelations. The human mind depends on a sense of stability. When that stability is shattered, especially in a long-term relationship, the emotional response can be extreme. In this case, we see signs of acute dissociation, a moment where rational thought gives way to pure emotional reaction. The defense leaned into this, arguing that the crime was not driven by malice but by overwhelming shock. They presented letters and correspondences that showed his wife had, indeed, hidden her past from him for their entire marriage. Was it deception? The defense attorney asked the jury. Yes. But deception does not justify murder. And yet, can any of us say with certainty how we would react if we found out that the very foundation of our life was built on a lie? A longtime friend of the accused testified next, recalling how the husband had idolized his wife, how he had always spoken of her as his greatest love. If he had known from the start, the friend said, voice breaking, I don't think it would have changed anything. But it was the not knowing. The feeling that the person he trusted most had kept something so huge from him. I think that broke him. The final arguments, deception, trust, and intent. In their closing statements, the prosecution reminded the jury of the most important fact: whatever his emotions, whatever his sense of betrayal, one truth remained. She is dead, the prosecutor said, stepping closer to the jury box. She did not threaten him. She did not attack him. She did not even attempt to flee. And yet, she was shot. Deliberately. Fatally. That is what you must remember. The defense took a different approach, urging the jury to see the man not as a calculated killer, but as a broken human being who had reached a breaking point. Yes, he pulled the trigger. Yes, he took a life. But do we truly believe that this man, who had never harmed anyone before, suddenly became a murderer in the span of a few seconds? Or was this the result of a psychological break, a moment of emotional devastation that turned tragic? The jury deliberated for 3 days. In the courtroom, tension was suffocating. Reporters filled every available seat. The family sat apart, his looking hollow, hers stone-faced. When the jury finally returned, all eyes were on them. The foreman stood, cleared his throat, and spoke. On the charge of second-degree murder, we find the defendant guilty. A sharp gasp from one side of the room. A muffled sob from another. The judge nodded solemnly, then looked toward the accused. You have been convicted by a jury of your peers, he said. Your actions, regardless of your reasons, ended a life. And for that, there must be consequences. A pause. A deep breath. I hereby sentence you to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15. The room erupted. Some saying it was too harsh. Others saying it wasn't harsh enough. The families remained still, absorbing the weight of what had just happened. As the husband was led away, he did not resist. He did not cry. He did not speak. And somewhere in the crowd, a single question lingered, unspoken but undeniable. Was this justice? The trial was over. The verdict was delivered. The case was closed. And yet, it wasn't. The echoes of that night, the shot fired in a quiet home, the secrets that unraveled, the emotions that erupted, extended far beyond a single courtroom. Beyond a single man. Beyond a single woman. This case had become something else. Something larger. A mirror reflecting society's deepest fears, biases, and unspoken questions. At the heart of it lay the issue that made the story so polarizing: identity, truth, and the weight of secrets. Gender identity and society's perception. For many, the revelation at the center of the case forced an uncomfortable confrontation with long-held beliefs about gender, identity, and honesty. There were those who saw the wife's decision to keep her past hidden as a betrayal, arguing that relationships, especially marriage, must be built on full disclosure. And then there were those who saw it differently. We need to understand the fear that trans people have lived with for generations, said Dr. Evelyn Carter, a sociologist specializing in gender studies. The fear of rejection. Of violence. Of losing everything just because of who they are. For many, the choice to disclose their past isn't just about trust, it's about survival. The case ignited debates in LGBTQ+ advocacy circles. Some argued that the wife had every right to keep her past private, especially if it posed no harm to her husband. Others acknowledged the emotional complexity, how withholding certain truths, even out of fear, can still have devastating consequences. This isn't just about one couple, said Marcus Green, a human rights attorney. It's about how society views trans identities. How we define authenticity. How we handle truth when it challenges what we believe about love and marriage. And at the center of it all, a painful, undeniable reality: a woman was dead. And a man was behind bars. The psychology of betrayal, how secrets shatter trust. But was this case truly about gender? Or was it about something more universal, something that transcends identity and speaks to the human condition. Psychologists studying the case pointed to a deeper issue, the psychological impact of long-held secrets in relationships. Trust is the foundation of any intimate relationship, explained Dr. Leonard Hayes, a clinical psychologist. When a secret is revealed, especially one that fundamentally shifts a person's understanding of their partner, it can create a psychological rupture. The person may feel like their entire relationship was an illusion. It's an identity crisis, not just for the partner who kept the secret, but for the one who discovers it. Experts debated whether the husband's reaction was purely emotional or if it was rooted in something more primal, an inability to reconcile the person he loved with the person he suddenly believed he never truly knew. There's an immediate sense of loss, Dr. Hayes continued. Not just of trust, but of reality as they understood it. It's grief. And sometimes, grief turns into something else. Anger. Desperation. Even violence. The broader legal and social consequences. The case also raised legal and ethical questions. Should there be laws about disclosing certain personal histories before marriage? Could deception, intentional or not, be legally considered provocation in a crime of passion? Legal scholars weighed in, with some suggesting that such cases might set dangerous precedents. Do we really want to create a world where someone's past must be legally disclosed before they can enter a relationship? Asked attorney Rachel Myers. Where does that stop? Medical history? Family history? What about deeply personal traumas? The law cannot dictate the terms of human relationships, it can only respond when those relationships turn deadly. And yet, others argued that personal histories, especially those that could fundamentally alter a spouse's perception of their marriage, should not be concealed. It's about informed consent, said legal analyst Daniel Rhodes. No one is saying deception justifies murder. But deception has consequences. And when emotions are involved, those consequences can be unpredictable. A society left questioning. The debate continues, long after the final gavel fell. Did the wife betray her husband by keeping her past a secret? Or was she simply protecting herself in a world that, too often, has been unkind to those like her? Was the husband a cold-blooded killer? Or a man who, in a moment of psychological collapse, did something irreversible? The answers remain elusive. The arguments persist. And the story, in its own way, never truly ends. One truth remains undeniable. One moment of revelation, led to one moment of destruction. And no one, not the victim, not the killer, not the people who knew them, would ever be the same again. The trial was over. The sentence was handed down. But for those left behind, the story didn't end with a verdict. The family left behind. For the couple's family and friends, the tragedy left wounds that could never fully heal. The victim's relatives mourned not only the loss of a loved one but the way she had been portrayed in death, her life reduced to a courtroom argument about deception and identity. The husband's family, too, struggled to reconcile the man they knew with the one who now sat behind bars. To them, he had always been a devoted husband, a loving father, a good man. But one action, one night, had rewritten his entire life. His children, now adults, were left with questions they could never fully answer. Could they forgive him? Could they understand what drove him to that moment? Or would they always be caught between love for their father and the horror of what he had done? The community's reckoning. In the town where they had built their lives, opinions remained divided. Some saw the husband as a victim, a man pushed to the edge by a truth he wasn't prepared for. Others saw only a killer, someone who let rage take precedence over reason. The case became a flashpoint for discussions on gender identity, marriage, and the ethics of disclosure. It forced difficult conversations in households, in places of worship, in political debates. And, for some, it was a stark reminder of the dangers faced by those who live in fear of being rejected for who they are. Lasting impact. Did anything change? Legal experts debated whether the case should influence future policies. Some argued that laws should be introduced to ensure transparency in marriage. Others warned against any legislation that could further endanger marginalized communities. No major legal changes resulted from the case, but its impact lingered. Advocacy groups pointed to it as an example of why education and awareness about gender identity were so crucial. Lawmakers, meanwhile, continued to grapple with where the boundaries of personal privacy and disclosure should lie. A final thought. In the end, this was a story about more than just one marriage or one crime. It was a story about trust, how it binds people together and how its destruction can unravel lives. It was about identity, how we define ourselves and how the truth, when withheld for too long, can become its own kind of weapon. And it was about love, the force that can heal, but also destroy. In a world where truth and identity intertwine, how do we navigate the complexities of love and trust? This case raises difficult questions, about truth, trust, and the weight of secrets. Was justice truly served? Should the past define a person's future? And when it comes to relationships, how much honesty is too much, or not enough? We want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe the verdict was fair? How do you feel about the choices made by both the husband and wife? Join the conversation in the comments below. And if you found this case compelling, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new true crime story. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.